Subscribe to History as it was lived, where the past is told as it was truly experienced. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, something happened that defies easy explanation. It did not begin with invasion or plague, nor with fire or famine, though famine and disease were already familiar companions to the people who lived there. It began quietly, almost invisibly, with a single woman stepping into a narrow cobblestone street and beginning to dance. There was no music playing, no festival banners hung from the timber-framed houses. No celebration marked the day. The sky was heavy with July heat, and the air carried the smells of livestock, sweat, and the nearby Rhine River. Merchants were arranging their goods. Bakers were preparing bread from whatever grain they could afford. Life was continuing in its usual strained rhythm, and then she began to move. At first, it might have seemed harmless. Perhaps she was celebrating something private. Perhaps she had lost her senses temporarily. But as the hours passed and the sun climbed higher, it became clear that this was not ordinary dancing. Her movements were erratic, almost violent. Her limbs jerked. Her feet struck the stone again and again without pause. Witnesses would later describe her expression as strained rather than joyful, as if she were compelled rather than entertained. She danced until she collapsed from exhaustion, and when she regained consciousness, she stood again and continued. Within days, others joined her. Within weeks, the number had grown into the dozens, and then the hundreds. By the time the city understood that something was terribly wrong, Strasbourg had become a place where bodies moved against their own will, where the streets echoed not with celebration, but with relentless, desperate motion. To understand how such an event could unfold, we must first understand the world in which it happened. Strasbourg, in 1518, was part of the Holy Roman Empire, a vast and fragmented political entity bound together by religious authority and uneasy alliances. Though prosperous in trade compared to many regions, the city was not immune to hardship. The early 16th century brought environmental instability. Harvests had been inconsistent. Cold winters and wet summers damaged crops, particularly rye, which formed the basis of bread for much of the population. Food shortages drove prices upward. Laborers found it increasingly difficult to feed their families. Malnutrition was common, and hunger sharpened tempers while dulling hope. Disease was another constant shadow. The Black Death had ravaged Europe less than 2 centuries earlier, and its memory remained vivid. Outbreaks of smallpox, syphilis, and other infections appeared periodically. Medical knowledge was rudimentary. Physicians relied on ancient Greek theories of bodily humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, to explain illness. There was no germ theory, no antibiotics, no reliable surgical practices. But perhaps the most powerful force shaping daily life was religion. Faith governed not only morality, but interpretation of events. If crops failed, God was testing his people. If disease spread, sin must be present. If tragedy struck, divine displeasure was the likely cause. In 1517, just 1 year earlier, Martin Luther had published his 95 Theses, igniting the Protestant Reformation. Religious unity in Europe was fracturing. The authority of the Catholic Church, long unquestioned, was under challenge. The spiritual stability of the continent felt uncertain. Strasbourg was a city simmering beneath multiple layers of stress: economic, medical, spiritual, and political. The population lived with chronic anxiety, and anxiety, when sustained long enough, demands release. The woman remembered as initiating the outbreak is known in records as Frau Trophäa. Beyond her name, history offers few details. We do not know her age or occupation. We do not know whether she had recently suffered personal tragedy or illness. We cannot hear her thoughts. But we know that sometime in July 1518, she stepped into the street and began to dance uncontrollably. Some accounts suggest she continued for 4 to 6 days with minimal rest. Imagine the physical consequences: muscles inflamed and trembling, blisters forming and rupturing, dehydration clouding cognition, sleep deprivation distorting perception. The human body is not designed for continuous exertion without recovery, yet witnesses claimed she persisted. At first, onlookers likely dismissed her behavior as madness or possession. Mental illness in the modern sense was not understood. Behavioral disturbances were often attributed to demons, curses, or divine punishment. Then something changed. Others began to move as she did. Within a week, approximately 30 individuals were dancing in Strasbourg streets. Within a month, contemporary accounts estimate that as many as 400 people were involved. Though numbers vary between sources, there is no doubt that the phenomenon spread rapidly and visibly. The dancing was not organized. It did not resemble coordinated folk traditions. Individuals moved independently, often violently. Some cried out in distress. Some appeared dissociated, staring past observers with vacant expressions. Reports describe swollen feet and bleeding skin. There are references to heart attacks and strokes caused by exhaustion, though precise mortality numbers remain debated. What is certain is that the city felt gripped by something uncontrollable. Daily life continued in uneasy coexistence with the spectacle. Merchants attempted to sell goods while dancers stumbled nearby. Church services carried on as the sounds of shuffling feet echoed outside cathedral walls. Parents pulled children indoors, fearful that proximity might trigger the same behavior. The phenomenon appeared contagious, though not in a biological sense. It spread through visibility, through observation, through shared fear. And as more bodies joined the motion, the anxiety of the city deepened. City authorities sought guidance from physicians. Operating under the humoral theory of medicine, doctors concluded that the dancers suffered from hot blood, an excess of internal heat that required release. The prescribed remedy was astonishing by modern standards: allow them to dance. Suppressing the movement, physicians believed, might worsen the imbalance. Instead, it should be encouraged until the body purged itself of excess heat. Authorities constructed wooden stages and cleared public halls. Musicians were hired to provide rhythm. Drummers and pipers filled the air with sound. Professional dancers were reportedly brought in to maintain momentum among the afflicted. The intention was therapeutic. The result was amplification. Music energized movement. Crowds gathered to watch. Visibility increased. Participation grew. Rather than diminishing the outbreak, the city had inadvertently transformed it into a sustained event. Centuries later, historians and scientists would search for explanations. One of the most cited theories involves ergot, a fungus that grows on rye. Ergot contains alkaloids chemically related to LSD and can produce hallucinations, convulsions, and altered mental states when ingested. Given the reliance on rye bread and the possibility of damp storage conditions, ergot poisoning initially seemed plausible. However, ergotism typically produces severe physical illness, including vomiting and gangrene in extreme cases. Convulsions are often painful and chaotic rather than sustained rhythmic movement. Victims are generally too debilitated to maintain coordinated dancing for extended periods. While ergot may have contributed to broader health issues in the region, it does not fully account for the prolonged, socially patterned nature of the dancing plague. Another explanation centers on religious belief, particularly the cult of Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was associated with neurological disorders and was believed by some to have the power to curse or cure uncontrollable movement. Pilgrimages to his shrines were common among those experiencing tremors or seizures. In a community deeply invested in such beliefs, observing neighbors dance uncontrollably could trigger fear of divine punishment. That fear, in turn, could manifest physically. Today, the most widely accepted explanation is mass psychogenic illness, sometimes referred to as mass hysteria. This phenomenon occurs when psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms within a group, spreading through social and environmental cues rather than biological contagion. Strasbourg, in 1518, fits many criteria associated with such outbreaks: prolonged stress, tight-knit community structure, shared belief systems, and visible triggering events. When one individual expresses extreme distress in a dramatic way, others, under similar strain, may unconsciously mirror that expression. The body, becomes the language of shared anxiety. Importantly, mass psychogenic illness does not imply fabrication or conscious imitation. Symptoms are real. Suffering is genuine. The mechanism lies in the interaction between mind and body under stress. In a world without psychological vocabulary, where spiritual interpretation dominated, the dancing may have been the only available expression of overwhelming pressure. Eventually, authorities shifted strategy. Music was banned. Public stages were dismantled. The afflicted were transported to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus outside the city. There, rituals were performed. Prayers were offered. Symbolic red shoes were placed upon the dancers' feet. The narrative shifted from spectacle to healing. Gradually, the outbreak subsided. Fewer new cases emerged. Existing dancers weakened and stopped. By early autumn, the phenomenon had ended as suddenly as it began. The Dancing Plague of 1518 remains one of the strangest episodes in recorded European history. No single theory explains every detail. No medical sample survives for analysis. We rely on chronicles, municipal records, and historical interpretation. But perhaps the deeper significance lies not in identifying a pathogen, but in recognizing human vulnerability. The people of Strasbourg were not foolish. They were living under immense strain. Hunger, disease, religious upheaval, and economic uncertainty shaped their daily reality. When stress overwhelms a community, expression finds a path. In 1518, that path was movement. Bodies dancing not in celebration, but in compulsion. A city caught in rhythm it did not choose. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: the human mind remains capable of extraordinary collective responses under pressure. The forms may change across centuries, but the underlying mechanisms of fear, belief, and stress endure. The streets of Strasbourg eventually fell silent again, but the questions never have. This was history as it was lived. Subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.